Welcome to Tuesday Talks. I'm Seema Kumar, CEO of Cure, and we are live today from Studio 345 at Cure. Today's Tuesday Talk delves into the remarkable story that combines breakthroughs in medical innovation with the unwavering determination of a father. Dr. Ed Damiano's world changed when his 11-month-old son, David, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Fueled by this personal challenge, Ed set out on a mission to improve his son's lives and the lives of countless others facing the same condition. This journey led to the creation of the revolutionary Bionic Pancreas, a device that autonomously regulates blood glucose level in type 1 diabetes. It's not just a story of a transforming healthcare, but it's also a testament to a parent's unwavering belief in creating a brighter future for their child. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Ed Damiano, the founder and executive chair of Beta Bionics. He is the visionary behind the novel biotech enterprise, and that is called Beta Bionics. And Ed is leading the charge in designing, developing, and launching the recently FDA-cleared iLet Bionic Pancreas. And this is a beacon of hope for those who are battling with type 1 diabetes. Welcome to Cure.
Thank you, Seema. I appreciate it.
I'm so thrilled to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Congratulations. So this got cleared just recently in May.
It did, just a couple of months ago, yeah.
And it was your son's birthday.
It was. I really appreciated the agency for doing that. So the FDA had been working on the application for many months.
Wow.
And they did get it FDA cleared on David's 24th birthday. So 23 years after, approximately, my wife diagnosed him with type 1 diabetes.
God, incredible. I mean, I'm having goosebumps. I mean, let's kind of, flash back a little bit to this journey that started when? 24 years ago, right?
23 years ago, yeah.
Yes, right, when your son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Tell us what that was like. I mean, because, you and your wife both got this diagnosis, and there are millions of patients who have type 1 diabetes, but it's very rare, because he was what, 11 months old at the time?
He was 11 months old, yeah.
Yeah. It was very rare. So what did that feel like, and how did you find out? And
so, I had a sort of a passing exposure to it in the early 70s to type 1 diabetes, where one of my cousins had type 1. And in the 70s, it was very difficult to manage diabetes. It wasn't even well understood as to whether or not it needed to be tightly controlled. It certainly did, but the evidence wasn't there yet. It was 2 decades before that time. So she was not well controlled, and I saw, the tumult that went along with life with type 1. So that was a very scary imprint that made when I was a young guy. And then fast forward to my son, who's a little tiny person, weighed 18 pounds, had half a liter of blood in his whole body, so it didn't take many carbohydrates to concentrate his blood. And I didn't know much about diabetes, but my wife, who was a pediatrician, at the time, she was a young pediatrician. She was just getting started, but she noticed something was off with David. I thought the symptoms that she sort of put together, she's a very good diagnostician, and this was evidence to that.
And pediatrician.
And a concerned parent, and so she sees just a few little subtle symptoms that you could easily attribute to sort of typical things that a 1-year-old would go through. He burst a diaper once, which that's hard to do. It's a lot of water, and that was a surprise. He vomited once. A lot of 1-year-olds who are nursing vomit. David didn't, but he did this time. And he was irritable. Now, David was a very passive, easygoing young little guy, and he was irritable on some days and just fine on others. And so that was strange. And then the last piece of sort of data she collected was that he was very precocious when it came to walking. He was pushing he was at 10 months of age, he was pushing a little wagon, and he was getting very close to taking his first steps. But by the time he was 11 months old, he was actually doing worse than he was at 10. And that's something a pediatrician hones in on. Kids don't get worse, they get better. And he wasn't. And so she put all those things together, and she brought him in, and ultimately she brought him to see her colleague. She was on call the previous day. And she said, what are you worried about? You're my colleague, you're a mom, you're a pediatrician, what's going on? She said, I want to rule out type 1 diabetes, leukemia, or brain tumor. So she had some weighty concerns. And so they did a blood sugar right away, and she brought David back home. He perked right up when she brought him into the doctor's office. The other thing, he was very kind of glossy-eyed and just staring off into space. But he perked right up when he saw the doctor.
Yeah.
But as soon as she got him home, he went right back into that state. And then we got the phone call within an hour. And his blood sugar was 8 times the normal range. And there's really only one thing that's going to do that, and that's glycemic dysregulation. It's diabetes. So she just scooped him up and shouted to me as she's making her way back into the car to go back into the hospital, saying, our son has type 1 diabetes and our lives have changed forever. And out they go to the pediatric intensive care unit.
Wow. Wow. I mean, you guys, you're both from the medical field, and she was a pediatrician, and she recognized the symptoms, but unfortunately, many parents may not know this, right? I mean, how is a diagnosis typically made? And if you don't know what to look for, the mathematical calculations of how insulin in your body, the needs that, you have at certain times of day. You being a university professor and your wife being a pediatrician, you are able to do all of this. What is a regular, family supposed to do, and how do you recognize these symptoms?
Yeah, so recognize the symptoms is the hard part, I think, and a lot of people miss that. And it helps to have the expertise that Toby had to do that. It's all to her credit that she did that, caught him so early. Although he's much more fragile at that age, I would say, than most kids who are diagnosed typically older than that. It's very rare to have someone under the age of 1 diagnosed with type 1. But they're thirsty, they're urinating a lot. So those are the kind of the classic symptoms. And they might have blurry vision and things of this kind. But David couldn't really communicate. So it was much harder to understand what's going on, to the extent that there was anything going on. So that was one thing. That's one challenge. But once the diagnosis is made, and hopefully it's made in time, in David's case, she really got in there early and sorted it out. We went on insulin therapy. There is no cure for type 1 diabetes. And prior to the discovery and purification of insulin a century ago, it was a death sentence. It was a worse diagnosis than cancer. There was no getting out of that alive. So immediately David goes on insulin therapy, and he uses a tiny dose of insulin because he's so small. And even the smallest amount of carbohydrates, the glucose that he'd eat in his diet, could cause his blood sugar to spike. So back then, there was no such thing as continuous glucose monitoring.
So the standard therapy was what?
Was finger stick measurements to understand what your glucose levels were. It was known in 2000. At that time, it was clear. For the past 7 years, it had been known that you must control blood sugar as tightly as possible without causing low blood sugar. That's the scary part. It's like threading this needle. Don't run your blood sugars high, but don't give yourself so much insulin that you go too low, because that could be catastrophically dangerous. But don't run them high all the time, because that has long-term complications. So it's threading this proverbial needle. And in David's case, we were dosing these tiny doses. We had to dilute the insulin to be able to use the syringes, because they weren't designed for people that size. So we had to dilute the insulin, and we gave him probably 8 to 10 shots a day, because he was nursing. How do you know how many carbohydrates is in breast milk? How do you know that? How could you possibly do that? So we're trying to figure that out. There's so much guesswork. There was nothing really quantitative about it, despite the fact that we pretended we were being very quantitative. It was just too many variables. And we gave him, for 2 months, we were giving him injection therapy. So he got about 8, I think we gave him 7 to 8 shots a day in his arms, in his legs, and he was all bruised up from these shots. So it was very clear David needed, probably more than anybody else, an insulin pump. And back then they were dumb pumps. They didn't have any smarts. There was no AI, there was no intelligent dosing algorithms. So you were the brains, mom and dad. So he wore an insulin pump. We got that onto him at 13 months of age. It was not FDA cleared for people under the age of 4 back then. So we had to sort of wrestle with the insurance company and make the case, but we could do that. And then David was on an insulin pump from 13 months of age to 24 years, where he is today, on one form of an insulin pump or another. So you infuse insulin to the pump, and then you check blood sugars frequently throughout the day. That's what the standard of care was then.
My God. And so I'm guessing at some point you said, okay, this is not sustainable.
Right.
We got to have a different
solution. That took about an hour to figure that
out. Yes, exactly, right? But as soon as you figured that out, what was your solution? What did you think? You felt like you had to do something about this, right?
Yeah, so we were checking him 15 times a day, 3 times overnight. And I did think that was sustainable. I didn't think it was scalable to other people. I thought that we had the particular skill sets to take very good care of him. But what happens when he becomes 18 and goes off to college. That's the day I was thinking about, with that day going off to college. Is he going to be able to do what we can do for him? Who's going to have his back at night? Yeah. I envisioned, because it was out there, early stages of continuous glucose monitor were starting to take shape, but they weren't reliable, they weren't accurate. They weren't a real thing yet. But I was hopeful that the enterprise sector, industry together with academia, would build a really good real-time continuous glucose monitor so we didn't have to check his blood sugar all the time. And I figured if that piece came in, insulin pumps already exist. So there needs to be a third technology. And I wasn't the first to think about this, but it occurred to me almost immediately upon getting him home from the ICU, and that was we need smart software to make decisions to dose insulin, which lowers blood sugar, and glucagon, which raises it. And that's something that's also not out in the world yet, is a dual hormone system, a bihormonal bionic pancreas, which was my initial thinking on this. We have two chambers, one with insulin and one with glucagon, to lower and raise blood sugar, which is biomimetic. That's what the pancreas does. And people with type 1 diabetes are not just missing insulin, they have an insulin insufficiency, they also don't secrete glucagon effectively. So they have a dual hormone insufficiency. And ultimately that is what we want to do at Beta Bionics, is replace both hormones. We start with the single hormone solution. So it was pretty much right away upon diagnosis that I thought that, given the expertise I have, I'm not certainly going to engineer a biological cure. My background was in applied mechanics and applied mathematics. It was really more about, can we develop algorithms that can sit in the middle between the sensor and the pump and build a synergistic system that can take complete control over all dosing. They all need to talk to each other, and it has to be autonomous, as you said. It has to be able to make all the dosing decisions to really level the playing field and have a solution that's scalable to the masses. And everybody gets, as much as possible, equally good glucose control. You have to have a system that's like a self-driving car.
So, great idea, fabulous concept. How did the concept go from that to reality? Like, how long did it take?
It took a generation. It took 2 decades.
Whoa.
It was a
Why?
2-decade, well, I wouldn't have ever expected that if you'd asked me 20 years ago. It was a hobby of mine, I would say, for the first 5 or 6 years. While I was still at the University of Illinois, I had a master's student, Firas Al-Khatib, who became a PhD student of mine, who was working on other problems, and he wasn't as much interested in that as when I proposed this idea of building the software, the algorithms that would dose insulin and glucagon. That got his interest, and he started focusing on that at around 2002. And that became the sum and substance of his PhD, which he finished in 2005 at the University of Illinois. At that time, he and I together moved to my new faculty position at Boston University in the biomedical engineering department. And so we moved over there, and we felt like we had something that needed to be tested. Just before he finished his PhD, I moved to BU, he comes out there, and we start doing studies in large animals, where pigs with diabetes, that we could induce like a diabetes pathology. We could control their blood sugar with the algorithms that Firas developed for his PhD. And so we started doing experiments for about 3 or 4 years in the animal model, and that's on 2005 to 2009. I met Stephen Russell at the Massachusetts General Hospital. He's a faculty member at MGH Harvard, and I'm at Boston University. We're a couple miles apart, and we started collaborating on human trials in 2008. And then 12 years later, through many grants from the NIH, the Helmsley Charitable Trust, the JDRF, we were able to pull together about $30 million of research funding to fund all those clinical trials and continue to improve and refine the algorithms to build something that really works across many different people, different backgrounds. And by 2020, we were ready to do what's called the so-called pivotal trial, which was 440 people randomized into a study testing the bionic pancreas over 13 weeks. And that trial finished in 2001.
Great.
2021, excuse me.
Yes,
2021.
2021. Yes. Right as the pandemic was sort of slowing down, right?
Yeah, so it was very challenging. 16 clinical sites randomizing 440 people in the middle of a global pandemic.
So when did the trial readout happen, And
so,
when did you first know what the results were? Were you anxious as to what it was going to show?
We were, but I think we had a lot of confidence in what to expect, and that's because
we'd done
we've done 20 trials. Half of them, if not more like 3/4 of them probably, were people with type 1. So we felt like we really understood how the algorithm was going to perform. And the early tests of the system was algorithms running on an iPhone, pumping with a couple of mechanical pumps. And then we started building our own purpose-built bionic pancreas, and I started building that in the lab. Then we started this Beta Bionics in 2015. The company didn't start for like almost 15 years from when the project began. So ultimately, in late 2021, the last participant, last visit was in October of 21. The Jaeb Center for Health Research was the contract research organization that coordinated the 16 clinical sites. And this was an NIH grant that was funded to my lab at Boston University that funded all that clinical research for the pivotal trial. And then in December, we got the data for the first time. We got to look at it. And it was remarkably predicted by the pre-pivotal data.
Wow.
I was stunned by just how closely those data sets aligned. So
That's
it really
great.
produced in the adult population where we had most experience.
So that was December 2021, right?
December 2021, we submitted our application in the spring to the FDA. So that data set was needed to support what's called the market application to bring this to a commercial product.
Yeah.
And that was submitted in the spring of 2022. Yes, spring of 2022.
Yes.
And it was cleared 14 months later by
Wow.
the FDA. So it took a long time.
Took a long time, yes. But you got it done. You got it done.
We did.
It's done. So tell us a little bit about how this device works.
Yeah, so essentially this is a wearable device.
Yep.
So it's
Do you want to hold it up a little?
Yeah, so
there
it's
we
basically
go.
the size of a credit card. Okay, it's 15 millimeters in thickness. And it has a display on it.
Yep.
It's a capacitive touchscreen display, very much like a smartphone, so you can interface with it.
Yep.
And it's got it shows your current glucose level and how much insulin's in the cartridge. It has a little cartridge, a glass cartridge, filled with insulin. Okay, so it's
look at that.
it holds about 1.8 mLs. So this would
insulin,
last
yeah.
about of insulin. It would last about 3 days in the average adult. And then it's got a tube that connects to a very tiny cannula. And you can see here, let's see if I can hold
It's
this.
like a small little pin.
Yeah, it's like a little pin. It's made of Teflon. There's we also have a steel one that's about the same length, about 6 millimeters. And this delivers
And where do
insulin
you
under the
put this
skin.
pin?
So you insert it. Typical in the abdomen. People
Yep.
wear it in the abdomen. Sometimes in the back of the arm. Sometimes they wear it on their backside. So there's a personal preference there, and you should move it around, and you should change it roughly every 3 days.
Yep.
And the cartridge, as I said, lasts about 3 days, and change that as needed as well. So that is there's a very precise little motor and drivetrain that advances insulin out of the cartridge down the tube and into this little cannula here that gets delivered just under the skin. Not into the blood vessels,
Yeah.
but just under the skin, and then it's absorbed by the
Yes.
capillaries.
Nice.
And so this is this little tubing that's connected to connects you to the device,
Yeah.
and you can disconnect at the site. So you can disconnect, and then you can, this stays on the skin.
Yeah.
And then you can put the iLet aside, and this
yeah.
will just be attached here. You
Yeah.
can take a shower or
Yeah.
bathe, and then you just reconnect
Yeah.
when you're ready to.
And then 3 days later, when you need to refill, what do? You just take this out and
Yeah,
then
you just do quarter turn, remove
Yeah.
the cartridge.
Yeah.
You put a full cartridge in,
Yeah.
and then it'll rewind the lead screw, and then it'll advance. And when you see a little bead of insulin coming out, then you're all ready to go, and you can pop in the new set.
Great. So really,
That's
what
the,
it
that's
this
the
is?
delivery side of it.
That's the delivery side of it.
So
Okay.
that's one
Yeah.
technology, but there are 3 technologies. The second one is really enabled by the Bluetooth radio that's built into the iLet. So the Bluetooth radio communicates with a body-worn continuous glucose monitor, and essentially there's another body-worn piece in addition to the cannula, and this is a G6 Dexcom made by a company called Dexcom Incorporated, and this was often worn on the abdomen. Some people wear it on the back of their arm as well, and it's a little tiny little wire that is inserted with a needle, just in the same way that this is inserted,
Yeah.
and that senses your glucose every 5 minutes. And Dexcom has built an extremely accurate and reliable continuous glucose monitor. Every 5 minutes, it sends out your current glucose level here
To this device.
To this device. So it's
Through Bluetooth.
110
Yeah.
mgs per deciliter, as it says here. So then the device reads that. Now the disconnect between the reading of the CGM and the pumping of insulin is what needed to be filled.
Yeah.
So we've had really good continuous glucose monitoring in this country and worldwide,
Yeah.
really, since about 2008.
Yeah.
Then Dexcom's technology really became dominant around 2012 through to the present day as a really great sensor. But there needs to be a third technology. And embedded in firmware on the iLet are these dosing algorithms that determine every 5 minutes, based on the CGM value, the continuous glucose monitoring measurement, how much insulin, minute doses of insulin to deliver every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's that
really-
software that is the learning
Yeah.
software.
There's a little bit of, dare I call it AI, involved.
Everybody wants to.
Yeah.
Technically, I wouldn't say it's that.
Yeah.
But that is sort of the academics in me speaking.
Yeah.
It is a learning system, though.
Yeah.
So it does see patterns in your glucose over the past 24 hours, and it adapts to that.
Yeah. So it's a learning system. It automatically calculates and makes a decision
Right.
on how much insulin to
At
deliver.
every 5-minute moment.
And at every 5-minute
So it
moment.
makes 288 decisions a day that
It
you no
makes
longer have to make.
288 decisions a day that you no longer need to make.
Exactly.
So to some degree, you can exhale a little bit,
Yes.
sleep through the night and not wake up 3 or 4 times,
Yes.
right? Trying to make
Yes.
all these mathematical calculations to see how much insulin to give your child.
It's exactly right. That exhaling is a really good way to put it. We talk
Yeah.
about it as unburdening, sort of there's an emotional burden
Yes.
of diabetes, and there's a cognitive burden, and not everybody
Yes.
has the same kind of technical acumen and levels of literacy and numeracy. The iLet is trying to be indiscriminate about that.
Yeah, that's great. So it looks like we are starting to get some questions from LinkedIn. So I have 20 more questions. This is fascinating, but I'm going to give the viewers a chance. So, viewer question: will it ever be compatible with a Freestyle Libre?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
So the Freestyle Libre is
Yeah.
now considered what's called an iCGM, just like the G6 Dexcom and the more the current G7 Dexcom, which came to the market more recently. They're both iCGMs, interoperable continuous glucose monitors. Abbott is now also has an iCGM in its Libre 2 and its Libre 3. And so our goal is to work with all iCGM manufacturers to make sure the iLet is compatible with any iCGM out there that is on the market.
Yeah,
so that would be our goal.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So then, tell us a little bit about you're working with the FDA. How did that go? And was it a conversation and to get it cleared? And then now that it's cleared, so tell us first that, and then now that it's cleared, it's 3 months, right? May through now. What's the plan for commercialization?
Okay, so to start with the FDA, so my relationship with the FDA goes back on this project, that's my only relationship with the FDA is through this project, goes back to 2007. That's when we first started talking with them. We were academics, the company was still 8 years into the future. And they were then and have continued to be, I would describe them as collaborators in this project.
Yeah.
So I do hear people use language like, we got to get this through the FDA.
Yeah. But they work with you.
They are absolutely a collaborator.
Partners.
They're partners with us, and they want this product on the market because they understand the value proposition it offers.
Yeah.
And so they worked extremely hard with us to design all the various trials we did over the years, including the pivotal trial, to give us feedback on what they think they need from a regulatory standpoint, and to work with us to build as best a product as we can.
That's great.
And so they've been great partners in all this, and will continue to be because we have more innovations to move forward.
That's great. I think we have one more question, right, from the viewers. What is that question? Let's see. We have, let me look at it. How does it handle times of exercise or increased activity?
So all single hormone systems, of which all devices out there today are only infusing insulin for type 1 diabetes management. It's always been a challenge to manage glucose drops that often accompany exercise. Not always, but often. And so what people with type 1 diabetes have to do is either suspend insulin before and during exercise, and sometimes afterwards, and also take carbohydrates, so eat sugar tablets or something. To the extent that this is a single hormone system still, as autonomous as it still needs that assistance. So when it comes to being vigorous, physically active, eating carbohydrates, suspending insulin is still something you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
In the future, our bihormonal system addresses that head on because it gives glucagon automatically, and it gets stored glucose from the liver, the person's liver, and puts it into the blood.
Yeah.
So in the future, as we move in that direction, that we'll have less reliance on you needing to suspend insulin and take carbohydrates to help manage the exercise. But with the iLet in its current configuration, we still do need to rely on carbohydrate and suspending insulin before exercise.
Yeah. So is there a 2.0?
Yes. So there is. I mean, that is one way to think about it. So the original vision was the bihormonal system, and as we work our way toward that goal, it became clear that the single hormone system was such an important value proposition as a step along that path.
Yeah.
That we ultimately decided to get this out to the market, and then the bihormonal pivotal trial is next.
Yes.
And that would be our sort of 2.0 product.
That's great.
And you did ask about
Yeah.
commercialization. So we actually were able to launch the product.
So it's available on the market?
It's available in the market in the US. We have lots of insurance coverage. This is not something you would buy yourself for most people. Insurance will cover it. And we have commercial coverage. We're waiting on government insurance as well. And so within about a month after clearance, we launched the product into the US market. So we've been out there for a couple of months.
Yes. I do have a question that's very important to Cure, which is about access to people of, who affordability, access equally, equity, of people of all skin. This is all very important. So talk a little bit about your access philosophy, and then there's a few more questions coming in on LinkedIn. So if we have time, we can take those. So first, the access question.
The access question. So, philosophically, the iLet was built on the premise that we need to build a system that is responsible for 100% of all insulin dosing. And with a system such as that, we should be able to level the playing field across different, socioeconomic demographics, race, ethnicity, average annualized income, and education levels. We don't want a device that would discriminates against people of different backgrounds. All diabetes technology historically has been very discriminatory, right? And you can predict someone's glucose level by their postal code, by their race, their ethnicity, by all these demographics I just mentioned. Unfortunately, that's true, and it's not just in the U.S. Even where you have national health care programs, that is unfortunately still true. So the technology really favors people who are highly educated, affluent, engaged, have the time to be engaged, and so forth. We wanted to build a device philosophically that wasn't like that. And so we think we did in these algorithms that make all these dosing decisions. So we designed the clinical trial deliberately, the pivotal trial for the device, of those 440 people who participated.
So you don't need to be a mathematical wizard
to
be able to actually use this.
That's right. I mean, the technical acumen shouldn't weigh in at all. Numeracy shouldn't really be a factor. So we brought in the most diverse cohort we've seen in any diabetes technology study. A full 25% of the cohort was non-white. We had a less educated population, more reflective of the population at large than what you see typically in diabetes tech studies, more ethnically diverse, lower annualized income, average annualized income than what we've seen in other studies. So we did a very good job of mirroring the population at large as much as possible. There are areas where we could have done even better, but now that we've done the trial, we see where we can make improvements in the next pivotal trial for the bihormonal system. But as it was a very good reflection of the population at large. And that makes us think that the system really will scale to a broader population and be less discriminatory than previous technology.
That's great. That's great. And I won't call it AI, but I will call it intelligence, augmentation.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Right?
Okay, so it's IA.
It's IA. But at least it sort of takes the stress out of your brain because you have to do so many calculations. So question, I think you kind of answered that, but maybe more directly. Are you working on adding glucagon to the iLet to make it a true bionic pancreas?
Yes, we absolutely are. So that is an effort that has been going on since the beginning, of course. And as I said, we took an exit ramp to launch the single hormone. We're getting right back on the main road, and we are very much focused on doing that next pivotal trial with a 2-chamber system. So it's actually this exact device you see here. There's a second chamber, and there's actually a space for it here. So in the next pivotal trial, we'll have 3 arms. We'll have people who randomize into the bihormonal with glucagon, people who will randomize into this device with just the single hormone, and then another group of people who randomize into their standard of care. So we'll have 3 comparisons in that trial.
That's great. That's excellent. Is the trial started already? Or
it hasn't. Our goal is to start that trial by the end of the year.
Excellent.
And it's a longer study. Instead of 13 weeks, it'll be 52 weeks. Instead of 440 people, it'll be over 700 people. So it's a much more, as ambitious as that trial was that we did in 2021 during the pandemic, this is even more ambitious.
That's great. That's kudos. I think that's wonderful. Great news for patients. Okay, now we have a couple more questions. I think, so does it use a rapid acting insulin or FIASP?
FIASP.
FIASP, yes.
It does. So in our pivotal trial for the single hormone iLet, and by the way, we do call it the iLet Bionic Pancreas, iLet being an homage to the islets of Langerhans and the pancreas, which secretes insulin and glucagon. And so in the single hormone iLet study, we had we studied rapid insulin, which is called Humalog and Novolog in this country. Those are the popular brands. And then we also considered Fiasp in the adult cohort in the randomized control trial. And we recently received FDA clearance in June, so 2 months ago, for the use of Fiasp in the iLet. And Novo Nordisk, is the pharmaceutical company that makes Fiasp, also got FDA approval that same day to use Fiasp in the iLet. And the nice thing about the Fiasp, besides it being an ultra-rapid insulin, is that Novo Nordisk made a cartridge that is pre-filled with Fiasp just for the iLet.
Ah, nice.
And only for the iLet right now.
Nice.
So that will launch into the US, and you won't have to fill the cartridge from a vial.
From a vial,
You just pull it out of a blister package and drop it in. So
That's
Fiasp
great.
will come pre-filled.
Convenience.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's for 18 and older. We have an application in front of the FDA for Fiasp in children, because we have more data in the extension study in kids with Fiasp. So Fiasp is in our repertoire.
Yeah. You know, you just reminded me of a question I meant to ask you, which is, did you do a pediatric cohort?
We did.
You did.
So our study also randomized an incredibly broad age range from 6 to 83.
Yeah, okay.
So we randomized all the way down to age 6, and the indication for use is cleared all the way down to age 6.
Excellent, fabulous. What about plans for entering into the European market and European regulatory, clearance, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely our goal. I mean, the goal of iLet is to bring it to as many people as possible, and that's not just in the U.S. It is absolutely on our roadmap. It is a separate and altogether new regulatory process. It's not an FDA process. We have to get a CE mark. And then, of course, insurance is complicated depending on if you're in the Middle East, if you're in Europe, and other markets. But all those things are on our to-do list. So we do want to bring it to Europe and other markets.
Drug development, clinical trials, getting through approvals and marketing, none of that is cheap, right? How did you raise funding for Beta Bionics over the last 2 decades, and what are your plans?
Yeah, so I started with small grants from private foundations, and that moved into adding enough value. It's always incremental value add, as I see it. Adding enough value to get NIH money, which was a bigger check from hundreds of thousands to a couple of million. And then those NIH grants turned into large foundation grants, and then larger NIH grants, 13 million and so on. And then along the way, we incorporated Beta Bionics as a for-profit benefit corporation in 2015. And because we kept it in the academic realm longer, I think, than most would, I was able to add value through the work that I was doing in my lab and my team, and Stephen Russell with his team. We were able to add enough value that by 2015 we could go right to strategic investors and get our first equity investment into Beta Bionics. And so we sort of bypassed the venture capital raise round altogether and moved right into strategic money. And we got about $10 million together in the first year. And then we could add more value, and then we could take that next increment. And that was ultimately brought us to the threshold of institutional investors, mutual fund companies, pension funds, hedge fund companies. And that brought in another 126 million, followed by 57 million a couple of years later. So we brought in about $30 million of sort of non-dilutive money through academia, and another approximately 200 million through equity raise into Beta Bionics, several rounds of financing. And that's sort of how we did it. And I think it's, ultimately it makes a lot of sense to do this because you can control the process more, I think, if you are able to bring value to it and find creative ways to finance the company.
Absolutely. Now, question again from viewers, how can we be part of your bihormonal trial?
So we have a couple phases of that trial, 3 phases of that trial. The first phase, as I mentioned, we hope to start by the end of the year. We're going to ultimately do this study. We use 16 clinical sites for the single hormone Bionic Pancreas pivotal trial. We're going to use about 30 sites for the bihormonal. It's a much bigger study. So it's going to be across the country. So ultimately, once we are recruiting into the trial, those sites will be able to send out announcements to people through clinics, and I'm sure we'll have a way to use to sort of leverage social media and let people know that we're recruiting, and certainly the clinical sites will be able to reach out to their patient populations as well. But if you were to send an email to Beta Bionics, we can put you on a list of interested study participants in the future. That's
great. That's wonderful. Well, here at Cure, our sort of unrelenting mission and vision is to advance healthcare and find cures. And so your story, Beta Bionics, your family story is just perfectly, an inspiring story. It's a story that is about advancing healthcare and finding cures, and if not cures, a way to manage disease, and do it better. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much. And I would emphasize that it is a bridge to a cure. It isn't a cure.
It isn't a cure. No.
It's not a cure for any by any means.
It is advancing healthcare, though.
Yeah,
right?
it certainly is.
Yeah, it certainly is. And so it's this it's a wonderful story. Thank you so much. Good luck with your trial, and
thank you.
Keep in touch. Keep us posted about how this all goes.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.